I've spent way too much of my life chasing the past. I have, like you, these special times in my background that kind of make my heart ache with longing just thinking about them. And sometimes that longing turns into something darker. For me, at least, it sometimes becomes a feeling of dread and despair, and it's accompanied by a belief that no matter how hard I try, nothing in my life will ever feel that good again, which devastates me. However, I believe that, at least for most of us, these feelings are nothing more than one of those annoying, dysfunctional lies that our brain tells us from time to time. And I found myself thinking about this a lot over the holidays as I'm with family and reminiscing about my past and occasionally telling stories to my kids. And there was a specific story I told my son that just brought the whole thing up, not only the feeling, but also the lies and the distortions and the illogical patterns in my brain around these feelings from the past, and why I seem to always have this negative feeling that my past was better than my present. So just a few blocks from my parents' house, and they still live in the same house they did when I was like 7 or 8 years old, there is a fitness store. It's a used fitness equipment store, but when I was growing up, it was a movie and video game rental place, kind of like a Blockbuster type place, but locally owned, and they also sold video games there. And it was close enough that I didn't mind walking there when I was like 12, 13, 14 years old. And I have this specific memory right after Christmas. I think I must have been 13. I was really hoping to get the PlayStation game Tomb Raider, the very first Tomb Raider. I didn't get it, but I did get a little bit of money, and I also had a couple older games I decided to sell, and I decided to take them in and trade them in. And I have this very fond memory. It was snowing really hard that day of little 13-year-old me in my coat, just walking through this blizzard with my little like grocery bag of games to trade in and my little sack of cash, and going in there and having just enough money to get Tomb Raider, and then walking back through the same blizzard, popping it in the PlayStation, and just getting this like warm, fuzzy, accomplished feeling. So I was sharing this memory with my son, and he asked me an interesting question, because I was telling him about the blizzard and the cold and everything, and like what a fun day this had been and what a special memory this was for me. And he asked me, "Weren't you cold?" And that question and my omission of being cold in the story that I was telling him is the first of 3 reasons why your past disproportionately feels better than your present in a way that is inaccurate. The first is that relatively benign or minor stressors do not become part of your core memories. I'm sure that I was cold. It was winter in Iowa, and it was snowing, so it was obviously not one of those random 50-degree days that we get here in the Midwest in the winter sometimes. But I don't think that it was memorably cold. I think it was probably 28 degrees or so. It was probably a normal cold temperature that I would expect around that time of year. And so I'm sure that while I was walking to and from this store, I'm sure I felt that cold. I'm sure I experienced it. I'm sure I didn't enjoy it. I don't like being cold. But it wasn't memorably unpleasant. It wasn't especially cold. It wasn't a big enough deal to become a part of that story to me. And so when I look back on that memory, I have no memory of being cold. I just can picture the thing happening in my brain like a movie. And the majority of the stressors that we feel, the majority of the unpleasant emotions that we experience come from relatively minor day-to-day things like being cold in the winter. They're unpleasant, but you don't remember them. And so when you look far enough back in your past to have forgotten all the little mundane stressors and problems and challenges that you were dealing with at the time, your past gets this like nostalgic sheen of perfection on it. Because it feels like this time when you were just unbothered and unworried and everything was just fine and magical. But it wasn't. That's a lie that our brains tell us, not on purpose. It's an omission. It's a lie of omission because we don't remember the normal stressors. Being bored is not a memorable experience. Being cold is not a memorable experience. Being a little bit stressed out about minor, normal, day-to-day stuff is not a memorable experience. You experience all these things in the moment. And so those moments were not as perfect as they seem in your head, but you do not recall all of the normal little problems that you had at that time in your life when you hold up those memories. And that is the first reason that your past disproportionately feels better in your present. The second reason is because loss glorifies the past. When you know that something is gone and that you cannot return to it, it creates a longing inside of you that irrationally and unrealistically amplifies the positive emotions associated with that experience. And this can be a place, it can be a person, it can be an era. Like, there's all these, I must have watched too many of them because now TikTok thinks I'm obsessed with them. But there's all these nostalgia videos on social media for various time periods, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, whatever. And these videos will show, like a bunch of products that were common around that time that aren't manufactured anymore. And a lot of times it's food. And I'll look at these little videos of all these snacks I used to eat when I was a kid. And I think, man, I miss Shark Bites. Man, I miss pizza chips. And yet I'm sure that when I had those things, they didn't feel special because they were readily available. Things suddenly feel much more special when you know that they are gone. When you can't do them anymore, you suddenly want to do them. Even if when you had access to them, you really weren't that much of a fan of them. When this is a person, there's a term for this. It's called postmortem sainthood. And the best example I've ever seen of it is in the show The Sopranos. If you've ever watched The Sopranos, so Tony, the main character, his father is deceased. And his dad passed away, I think, when Tony was a teenager. His mom is still living. And when Tony's mom talks about Tony's deceased father, she describes him as this amazing person, like this irreplaceable, ideal father and husband. And later on in the show, you see flashbacks of Tony's childhood where you actually get to see his dad. And his dad was a straight up jerk. His dad was abusive to his mother, like physically, verbally, emotionally abusive. He was neglectful to Tony. He would bail on him for long periods of time. He was an awful dad and husband. And I'm sure at the time that's probably how everyone felt. But when he's gone, and it's fictional, I know, but this is a real thing that happens. When this person is gone, and you know that, every experience that you've had with this person is now just a memory. You will form no new memories with this person. You suddenly miss them. And you elevate them in your mind to a degree that is unrealistic and not consistent with what it was like to actually have them here. And I experienced this with, there's a store that I used to go to back up in northern Minnesota that's closed now. And I know it was just like a normal store. But it closed a few years back, and there's a part of me that's like, oh, I would give anything to go back to that store. It's just like a normal drugstore. It's not. I logically know that it is not special, but when it is inaccessible to me, and when I know it has been taken from me forever, that creates this longing, this loss that glorifies the experiences I've had in the past that I know I cannot fully repeat. That is the second reason why your past feels so much better than your present. The third is that during the moments from your past that you long for, that create that sense of nostalgia, that you glorify in your mind, you were probably not comparing them to anything. You were probably not in your head trying to figure out if they measure up to something you had previously experienced. And that is a vicious cycle that I see people fall into over and over and over again, which is when they have a decent amount of these cherished memories. They're often childhood memories. Sometimes they're memories from adolescence. I personally don't have that. Adolescence was not a highlight of my life, but I know that for many people it was, so that's just me. Once you get to 30, 40, 50 years old, those times feel so special, and you compare what's happening in your life right now to your distorted and unrealistically positive sense of what things were back then, and it feels like nothing in your current life is ever good enough because it's always being compared to something unrealistic. And so you end up constantly chasing the past and never fully experiencing the present. Chasing your past poisons your present and destroys your future. And part of the reason that you don't get the sense of creating new memories that seem as special or as cherished as your old memories is because you are not fully cognitively and emotionally present in the new memories you're forming. Because part of your mental energy, part of your brain power, is being used by comparing them to the past and seeing if they measure up and usually deciding, no, this is a good moment, but this is not nearly as good as like that trip I took when I was 10, which again is an illusion. You are chasing a fantasy. It might as well be an alternate reality. Those events were real, but the feelings associated with them are not. The way you feel when you think of your happiest memories is not the way you felt when you are experiencing them, or when you were experiencing them, I should say. That sense of carefree, nostalgic perfection never existed. It didn't. It's an illusion created by the mental glitches we have already discussed. The only way to create new memories that will someday feel like your old memories is, paradoxically, not trying to recreate the past and simply allowing the present to be the present. It will never be a replay of the happiest times in your past. That does not mean that it can't be as good. It just means that it will be different. You have to be able to allow your present to just be the unique experience that it's going to be without having it constantly being forced to live in the shadow of something it will never measure up to, because the thing you're trying to compare it to isn't really what you think it is. I hope this makes sense to you. I hope it helps. This is something that really, really gets me. I'm so easily pulled out of the present by reminiscing about the best parts from my past. And it's taken away time with my kids. That's the one that bothers me the most, is as I have kids, I compare their experiences to my own childhood, and it never seems as good. And I know that's just a glitch. That's all it is. It's a glitch, and I have to constantly stay mindful of that. And I have to just appreciate what I have in the present moment. That's all any of us can do. And if you do that, I believe that the quality of your life and your mood in general will improve. I hope this helps, and I'll see you next time. Take care.